Genesis 46. We'll be considering the whole chapter. I'd like to go ahead and pray at the outset. Heavenly Father, we're very grateful for what you've put for us here in this chapter, and ask you to make it plain to us and clear. We would see ourselves and your involvement in our own lives reflected in this chapter, and we would gain insight not only into who you are and your way with men, but into what things you may or may not be doing in our own lives. We pray that you'd build faith in us in terms of our confidence in your ability and your willingness to make good on your promises. We gain a confidence in you that would help us in the days ahead and even today. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Well, the title of the message today is Out of Canaan and Into Egypt. Out of Canaan and into Egypt. Today we will consider the departure of Jacob and his descendants out of Canaan, as we said, but then also the plans that Joseph has waiting for them once they arrive in Egypt. The plans that Joseph has arriving for them. Those are kind of the bookends of the chapter. You have, Jacob departs with his family from Canaan, and then on the other end you have, they get there, and Joseph kind of unveils, these are the plans that I have for you now that you're here. And the next chapter, then they set those things in motion. So that's kind of the two bookends. In addition, though, to those two main things, and in between those two main things, we read a listing of the descendants of Jacob. So they're all going to leave, and then it's kind of a good time if you're concerned with who begat who, and we're all part of a family, and we want to remember hundreds of years how we're all related. This is a good opportunity to stop and say, okay, now, when that happened, these are all the sons of the sons and the great-grandsons and how everybody's situated, and this is the state of the family at this time. And so that happens, kind of there in the middle. That list is described a couple different ways in the text. One time it's described as Jacob and his sons. In another place it is described as all the persons belonging to Jacob who came into Egypt, who were his own descendants, not including Jacob's sons' wives. That's another time that it's listed. And then there's yet one more I won't get into right now. But so this list is described in various ways, and I mention that because if we've learned anything, I hope, so far in Genesis about genealogies, it's that you can give a genealogy the same. You could have a certain people in a room, and the biblical authors could give 10 different genealogies of those people and all be accurate and true based on what they tell you in advance about what they're trying to do in their genealogy. And that would drive us crazy because we just want to know what's the legal, descendants and how old were they when this happened and all those kind of things. Tell me nice and clean about the day of birth and the day of death and direct descendants, and I don't want to know anything else. But the biblical authors just don't really care much that you feel that way, and they don't already ever give that sort of a genealogy. And so we'll notice that a little bit as we go through. And then, so we could say the chapter breaks down into those three main sections. You have the beginning where they leave, and then you have this listing, and then they get there, and Joseph reveals his plans for them. But besides those three sections, there are also three other things that I want to draw your attention to in the chapter. Very important things that are related for us to consider. These aren't, again, you have kind of the outline, the three sections, but there are three things that I think are really important. Those things are found in the first and the last sections, but the first section, we read about Jacob being afraid to leave for Canaan, and then of God reassuring him. I think that's significant, and I would like for us we'll spend some time kind of thinking about that. The second thing is we read once again about some more evidence of Judah's prominent place of leadership among the sons of Jacob. That comes out again. And then third, we read about the reunion of father and son between Jacob and his son Joseph. And so those are, I think, three additionally significant things to notice. All of that merely to say there are plenty of things happening in this chapter, and we should have no shortage of opportunity to learn about God and all that He's doing among this generation of people of Israel at that time. Typically, I read all the text at the beginning. I don't want to do that today. I want to read the chapter as we go, kind of one section at a time, explaining things and commenting as we go. And then once all that is done, we may come back and consider a few other things. So with that, as we prepare then to dive into Genesis 46, I'm very aware, before we start reading the text, that it has been some weeks since we last considered Genesis together. And so I want to just remind you of the way the last chapter ended. Really, I think you kind of have to do that to even understand this chapter. And that is basically, if we were to look at Genesis chapter 45 and verse 28, and just kind of start there. And Israel said, having heard the report, and having seen all the things that were presented to him, after some time of persuasion, Israel came to the point, and he said, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." And then we launch into this chapter, where it says in verse 1, "So Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba." So this is how, we have a chapter division, but we've got to understand it's the actions of 46 are right after he said, okay, this is enough. And so these words here, Israel, think of this, the Prince of God. This is what it says in chapter 28, or verse 28 of chapter 45. And Israel said. So Israel, the Prince of God, the man who wrestled with men and prevailed, then who wrestled with God and prevailed in his desperation and in his seeking for a blessing. Remember, that's how he got this name, Israel. Moses uses that name here, Israel. That man has been reduced in his life and his experience to a very painful and sad existence of mourning until he dies. That's kind of staggering. He was in that spot. He said, I'm going to mourn my son Joseph forever until I die. The Prince of God, that's going to be his life. This is what he had been reduced to by what he was led to believe had happened to his son Joseph. But now he has ample evidence in front of his eyes and in his ears to the contrary, that is not what has happened. Joseph is still alive, and his response is decisive and expresses well all these years of heartache and longing and mourning that have characterized his life for these 22 years. He says, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive." Like, it's enough. I don't need anything else. I've got enough. Just so succinctly, if you just imagine yourself this man saying this, it's just absolutely perfect. It characterizes everything you imagine him feeling. It's enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. But more than that, his plans are also related to us in words that explain his frail state and his love, which now considers his frail state as no excuse to keep from this hard journey, this long and dangerous journey. He says, "I will go and see him before I die." If a young person wouldn't say that, I'm going to go and visit him before I die on a journey they're going to take. Now they might say, before I die, one day in 50 years, I'd like to plan a trip to go someplace. But they don't say, let's pack up and go. I'm going to do this before I die. I'm going to see this person before I die. Because their sense of death is not imminent. But for Jacob, it's very imminent. He's frail, he's weak, he's not taken these other journeys. And there's indications of his weak state all the way through this chapter. I will go and see him before I die. So it doesn't, we'll just say this. And so with that, we remember Israel's intention and his purpose. He's fully prepared, if necessary, to make this trip to see his son Joseph, even if it's the last thing he does and it kills him once he arrives and sees him. He's going to go. And with that, then, I think we're ready to begin by reading this first section. My kind of title for these first 4 verses is simply, God assures a frightful and an eager Jacob. God assures a frightful and eager Jacob. Verse 1. So Israel, Moses still using that phrase, or that name, so Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here am I. Then he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. All right. Having determined to go to his son Joseph in Egypt to see him once more with his own eyes, Israel then takes his journey. He gives orders, surely, doesn't do it himself, gives orders for everything to be packed up. Not just a few things, think of this, but everything. Bring it all. They will not be returning soon. As a clan of people, you think about how they've been existing, as a clan of people who have been settling from place to place, periodically moving every few months or years, this is nothing new. This is the way they've been existing. But what is new, however, is the destination. We're leaving the land of promise. We're leaving Canaan. We're going to Egypt. And also the reason for moving. We're not moving on because we've grazed this place off and we got to go somewhere else, or because we've worn out our welcome. None of those things. Rather, we are moving on to go see Joseph. From what I can tell, if we look at this, he says, so Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba. There's that place, Beersheba. That has come up many times already in Genesis. From what I can tell, there seems to have been a few places that in the patriarchal times that the patriarchs had called Beersheba. At least there seems to have been an altar somewhere named Beersheba, and also a city with an altar nearby. And both the altar and the city had the name Beersheba. I want to mention specifically a few times that this name Beersheba has come up to give us some context, because I don't think we'll put it this way, when Jacob goes there to Beersheba and offers sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac, you can't read that, but you can't read some history there. As he's going to leave the land and go to Egypt, he goes over to this place called Beersheba and makes an altar or an offering. Makes offerings to the God of his father Isaac. There's a lot of history there. When he's doing this, he's thinking about the things that God had done with Isaac, probably with Abraham, with his family before, the promises that had been made. He's leaving, and we know from the next verse, God tells him, don't be afraid, or 2 verses later, don't be afraid. So we know he's fearful. There's a lot going on in his mind. He's thinking about things that had happened in the past and his desire to leave now, and he's afraid. And so he comes to this place of Beersheba. And so I don't think it's a good job on my part to just say, well, that's just the name of the place, and not to talk about the importance of this place, Beersheba, likely the importance that he had with him in his own mind as he goes to this place. Why go to Beersheba? So specifically, I want to first mention the altar of Abraham, which possibly could have been this same place, but I don't think it's likely, where Abraham had called upon the name of God, the everlasting God. He calls on the name of Yahweh, the everlasting God. God had provided at that moment a peace for Abraham in the land after his second time lying about Sarah, his wife. And after the covenant was made between Abraham and Abimelech, the covenant of peace, which God had provided, while Abraham was alone in the place, Abraham then planted a tree at that place and called upon God there, likely in repentance. We talked about that at the time. It was years ago now, but in repentance, in faith, devotion, thankfulness to God, right? He's repentant for the fact that Abimelech has been shown to be far more righteous than he was, and all of this. He plants the tree in terms of faith. And you never plant a tree and don't think to come back. Like you plant this tree and it's like God has made a place for us here. And you plant this tree and you think generations will come later and see this tree and remember what God has done and recall it. And so you do it in faith, right? You move to a new house. What do? Maybe you plant some trees. Why? Because you anticipate living there sometime and getting to enjoy them in 20 years. It's this sort of a thing. And so this is what Abraham does. He plants this tree and calls the place Beersheba. He did it in devotion to God and in thankfulness for all that God had done for him so far. That's the first time we come across this name, Beersheba. And this is what Abraham does. Then second, I want to mention that Isaac also, who was mentioned specifically by Jacob, it's on Jacob's mouth here, he goes or Moses says, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Isaac also had named a place Beersheba after he made a covenant of peace with the Philistines who'd been harassing him. After that covenant, remember Isaac was his men were redigging the wells that his father Abraham had dug in the land that they had filled in, and they were redigging them, and everywhere they'd go, they'd get run off by the Philistines. And finally, it came to a head, and they made peace. And having made peace, then, after that, Isaac he gets word right after that happened that, hey, we found a well. And so Isaac called the name of that well, this new well, Beersheba. And then there was a city nearby, or maybe there came to be a city which had the name then, at least among the Israelites, as Beersheba. So both this well and the city, and then you have this altar. Now all of these places, based on both Abraham and Isaac, had been dealing with the Philistines when Beersheba comes up. It's very possible that the place where Isaac meets these men and makes peace with the Philistines is maybe at the altar or under the tree where Abraham called this place Beersheba. It's very possible. They were nearby. And then they get word about, there's this well, and he calls that Beersheba, and there's a town nearby, and we call that Beersheba. It's all kind of in the same area. I don't mean to say that they're within 100 yards apart or something, but they're all reasonably in the same vicinity, very possibly. And then there's Jacob himself. He's got some history with this place. When he was on the run from Esau for his life, the place they were living at the time where he left was Beersheba. He left Beersheba to go to Haran. So the last comfortable place he had slept in before he had a stone for a pillow was Beersheba. This was the place. Once again, God had provided. He left there, he journeyed toward Haran. This was not the place where God appeared to him, which was later called Bethel, but was the place where they were living when he had to flee. So here he is now. He's got some history to this. He's grown up, in this area, at least some years growing up. Spent some of his adult life there as well. He's on his way out of the promised land. He gets off of his wagon, stops everything, gets off the wagon, goes over there, gets some of the animals, slaughters them, and makes a sacrifice to God, makes offerings to God there. And who does he offer them to? Not just to God, but specifically the God of his father Isaac. I think he's having some doubts about going. I think is what's happened. He's already packed up. They're already on their way. Comes up. Maybe he realizes they're getting ready to pass by Beersheba, and he has all these thoughts in his mind. He says, "Whoa, stop. Why are we stopping? We got to go. Thought you were excited to see him. I'm very excited to see him, but I need to do this." And he does it. You wonder what the sons thought, what everyone thought. We wonder even what he's thinking. Again, I said I think he's having some doubts about going. He's sure that he wants to do this. He wants to go see his son. There's no doubt about that. But the idea of leaving the land of promise to do so, I think, is a scary proposition. No doubt he has in his mind the words that God spoke to Abraham about the 400 years of affliction that awaits the descendants of Abraham in some foreign country. Right? I mean, that's That's kind of scary. You just wonder, we're supposed to be in this land. I wasn't supposed to, we're supposed to be here. My brother left, and he went, and Esau, he's got his own people over there, and Ishmael was sent away. It was me, and we're here, and God planted us in this land, and I'm going to leave now. And I remember that God said, when we go to some other place, it'll be 400 years of affliction and slavery. Could it be that my actions now would be seen by God as disobedience? That I've left, and now, with meeting God's disapproval, we'd be punished for 400 years as slaves. Is that how this is going to happen? Am I setting us up for the discipline and the disfavor of God? That He wouldn't abandon us, but that He would discipline us for 400 years due to my disobedience. You remember, he's got reasons to think this, when Abraham went to Egypt, it did not bode well for him. It was a time of famine also, and he left. It was accompanied, though, by Abraham with moral failure and moral weakness and a forgetting of God. These altars that he came to, this place of Beersheba, had been testimonies. So you have Abraham, the way Abraham left and was not trusting God. These testimonies, when Jacob comes to this place of Beersheba, these are places with history. That name Beersheba had always been testimonies to the way the Lord had provided for them peace and safety and security and a place to be in the land. How could he now leave? And as he leaves, he passes by the place which testifies to him about God's faithfulness to them, that even though it looks like there's no way for them to exist in the land, God will provide for them in the land. It's as though these altars and this city and the well are all calling out to him, don't forget the way I've provided for you here. And he's conflicted all of a sudden. Wait a minute. I really want to go. I feel like I should go. But I don't know now. What do I do? And so he's afraid. He's worried about jeopardizing this whole thing. Could he now leave and still have God's favor? But then he's also conflicted because at the same time, what words, these dreams that his son had and relayed this dream to him. And it just upset the whole family. He even rebuked his son for them. But he stored them up in his heart. He meditated and thought about them. And for all these years thought, well, they'll never come to pass. I don't know what that was all about. And now he's still alive. And he's a ruler of Egypt. And he wants you to go down and see him. How else could that dream ever be fulfilled if he doesn't go down there? So there's all these things going on, and he's fearful. It's the sort of thing that begins to give you doubt. You're already packed up and on the journey, and you just think, hang on, wait a minute. I need to figure this out. And he goes over and he begins to make these offerings to God. Now, Moses has been going out of his way to refer to Jacob as Israel. Israel, Israel, Israel. And then God, who said, what's your name? And Jacob said, my name's Jacob. He said, from now on, your name is Israel. Then the next time God speaks to him, he says, hey, Jacob. It's staggering. Moses is calling him Israel. God calls him Jacob, right? Verse 2. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here am I. It would be curious, wouldn't it? That's rather curious. God didn't do that with Abram. Call you Abraham and then start saying Abram all the time. But here with Jacob, this is what he does. Now we as believers, those who study our Bibles, hardly ever refer to Jacob as Israel. Because when we think of Israel, we know it's another name for the nation of Israel, and so we just try not to confuse the two. But at this time, it wasn't a nation of Israel. It was Dad's name is Israel. And they call him Israel. And sometimes Moses calls him Jacob. Sometimes he calls him Israel. But here, he's been calling him Israel, and God calls Israel Jacob. It's a strange thing, isn't it? Someone changes your name, like they're the ones that changed it, and then they start using your old name again? Why? You've got, even if it's nicknames, like people if they give you a nickname, they tend to want it to stick, and they don't call you anything else if they can help it. Right? That's just how it goes. Like, hey, I got this name for you, and we're just going to use it all the time. And this is more serious than a nickname, but God calls him Jacob. It's curious. After all, again, he had changed his name, yet he follows it up with words not to be afraid. Jacob, Jacob, he said, here I am. Then he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid. God uses this old name, I think, to remind him of the new name and set the two in contrast. The way you had been and the way I've made you. The way life was before when you were scrapping and scrambling and worried about everything, and the way it's been since when you've realized how I'd provided and all that I've done for you and the way you prevail in this world. This contrast. And the height, that contrast comes up when you start thinking about those names and what they had meant. And if God then, if Jacob is all afraid and worried, and God can come to him and says, hey, Jacob, and it's like, oh yeah, I haven't had these feelings since I was Jacob. I haven't acted this way since I was Jacob. I haven't been concerned and is full of doubt and having to figure out on my own since I was Jacob. And I'm not Jacob. I can be confident in you. I think he uses the old name because Jacob is fearing what will happen as he looks around in fear and strategizes for the best way to keep safe and secure. God meets him here and assures him he need not fear. Rather, God assures him of what? He says three things to him. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt. That's the command. And there's three reasons. I will make you, it says, I will make you into a great nation. That's the one reason. But then there's three assurances. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. Three things. So the first is the main reason. Don't be afraid, because there I will make you into a great nation. Great things await you there. Don't worry about being disciplined and chastised and being afflicted like, oh, yeah, the affliction, I talked to Abraham about this affliction, that'll happen, but I'm going to make you there into a great nation. It's a positive step. This is a step forward in my plan, not a step backward. This is not a chastisement. This is not your 40 years in the wilderness, which will one day happen. Right? This is not what this is. This is simply a step forward in the plan. It'll be a difficult one, but it's on the way forward. I've planned it. There are good things in store for you. And then verse 4, as I said again, three assurances he gives them. I myself will go down with you to Egypt. That phrase, I myself will go down with you to Egypt, is so similar to what God did with him in Haran. God was with him. God was with him. God was with him. It's similar to what we've seen recently with Joseph. He was a slave. God was with him. He was in prison. God was with him. God was with him everywhere to bless him, to give him success, to protect him, to encourage him. You remember Jacob when he was out there in Haran seeking a wife, seeking a life, right, escaping his brother Esau, and he was being protected from all the schemes of his uncle Laban. He was being protected. God was with him, gave him success. He's got to work for his uncle for all these years, and his uncle keeps changing the conditions and says, okay, well now his uncle sees that they keep producing this kind of livestock that looks like this, and so the uncle says, well, from now on, those are the kind of livestock I get. And it's okay, and that's not what we had agreed on, but that's fine. That's the way it'll be from now on. And the next thing you know, God changes it, and now all the livestock produce another way. And then Laban doesn't like that. It's just constant. And God is looking out for him. God is with him. God's protecting him. Laban's servants get so mad, and his family gets so angry with him. I mean, you talk about being the black sheep of the family, right? Jacob comes to town, and in a matter of years, all the wealth that Laban had is all now. Jacob's got everything, and Laban's and his kids don't hardly have anything. It's not for lack of trying. They've cheated him every chance they can get, but it hasn't worked, right? Cheaters never prosper. Well, now God tells him again, look, you go down there, I'm going to be with you. You don't need to worry. I'm with you. That's a real assurance. That's a comfort that he needed. He says, and I will also bring you up again. This one's a little curious. Because he dies in Egypt. God didn't bring him up again. Not in that sense. But he did in the sense of, as a nation, he brought them up out of there. Right? Now, he brought his bones up out of there. And they buried his bones in Canaan. But he wasn't brought up in the same way. Now, we know that it's referring to the nation. It's a little bit of a question as to whether Jacob knows he's referring to the nation. Maybe, maybe not. I'll argue for that here in just a second. And then he says, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. He's telling him about his death. You're going to die. But Joseph will be the one to close your eyes. He'll be with you at your death. You're not just going to go down and see Joseph. You're going to be with him. And when it comes to the end of your life, you'll be with that dear boy who you've missed for all these years. And it will be a tender scene. It will be a comforting scene. It will be a scene full of love. That's what God tells him at these words. Now, these things are true, but they are fulfilled in very different ways. One other thing I want to say about these words he speaks to Jacob about his death, it's very similar to what God said to Abraham in Genesis 15:15, when he told Abraham, your descendants are going to go to a foreign land, they're going to be harassed there and mistreated, persecuted for 400 years, and afterwards I'll bring them back. He says, but for you, that's going to happen, but for you, you're going to die in a good old age and be gathered to your fathers in peace. And he was. Same thing. There's this fearful thing that's going to happen, but listen, it's going to go well for you. The Bible does that several times with different men. So all these things are fulfilled in different ways. I think it's likely that when God says, I will bring you up again, I think it's likely that Jacob understood that what didn't mean in his life, that he wasn't himself going to come up. He already has a very real sense of the national and the future nature of the promise. That's a big part of what's got him, I think, afraid and worried at this time. What he was concerned with was not his own life, but whether his actions would cause harm for future generations, and if God would approve of all of this. And he receives the answer to that in these words. Look, I'll be with you when you go down. Right? Not just you, but you and the nation. And I'm going to bring you all up again, I think is the idea. I'm going to bring you up again. And for you personally, Joseph's hands will close your eyes. And so all those things are very reassuring to him. Now, let's move on. That's the first section. They leave. They set out. Those first 4 verses. And then that's the first part of that first section. Now let's look at verses 5 through 7, and we'll finish out this first section. Then Jacob set out from Beersheba. The sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, their little ones, and their wives in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock and their goods, which they had gained in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt. Jacob and all of his offspring with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters. All of his offspring he brought with him into Egypt. So, no one left behind, right? None of his descendants were left behind. It doesn't say that all of his servants came. I don't think we're meant to, figure out that what the names of the servants were who didn't come. We know many of their servants did come. We know that from other places in the Bible. But the important point here is the entire family came. That matters because remember, God has said, you and your descendants after you will share in these promises. And if you've got all these descendants that aren't sharing in it, if they left half the family behind, that matters. But they all came. All of them. None of them were absent. As many as were alive came. You see that? All his offspring he brought with him into Egypt. Now what else do we notice here? Verse 5. Then Jacob set out from Beersheba. the sons of Israel, so we use the name Jacob, now we're using the name Israel again. The sons of Israel carried Jacob, their father, their little ones, and their wives in the wagons. So their little kids, little ones whose legs get so tired, right? Put them in the wagon. Right? They take, and then all their goods, right? But their wives in the wagon as well. And what else? Their father. Put him in a wagon. And you do that because he can't make the journey. He's not walking. He's on a wagon because he's frail. This guy thinks he's going to die. He didn't make any of the other trips, and when he goes to make this one, he's not sure how it's going to go. So you put him in a wagon. They also took their livestock and their goods, which they had gained in the land of Canaan. Think of the way it describes that. Their livestock and their goods. How did they get that? Well, they had gained it in the land of Canaan. Remember, he came with a lot of things from Laban. But then he got there, he gave it all away to Esau. Then Esau says, no, you can keep it. Well, it's okay, so he keeps a lot of it. But then he's gained a lot more. God has continued to bless them. They've got a lot of things here. All the livestock and their goods which they had gained in the land of Canaan. And they came into Egypt. Jacob and all his offspring with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters, all of his offspring he brought with him into Egypt. Now, how many generations does it mention there? You've got Jacob, that's one, and his sons, that's the second generation, and his sons' sons, that's the third generation, right? And his sons' daughters, right? So, 3 generations is what it mentions. All his offspring he brought with him into Egypt. I say that because it mentions 3 generations here, but in this listing of names, we're going to get down to a 4th generation. Some of his great-grandsons, which is a little odd because of the age of all these men. That, the oldest one is, in his mid-40s. And it's like, that guy's a grandpa already. It's very possible. I'm not saying, I know people that are in that situation. It's just interesting. We're going to come to Benjamin, who is the oldest, like 25, and he's got listed here 10 sons already. I don't know, if you've been thinking about this story, have you thought about Benjamin as the patriarch, a new patriarch? He's got 10 kids, 10 sons. How many wives does he have? I don't know. It's an interesting situation and one that causes a lot of problems. So, not just those things. So, we read about this summary then, about his departure from Canaan as Moses gives it. So then we have this next section, this detailed list of the names and relations of Jacob's descendants. We'll read through these verses, make some very brief comments as we go, and then I'll talk a little bit, just kind of lay out for you some of the controversies surrounding this, because I don't want to ferret all them out and give you, we could spend 2 or 3 messages if we were going to do it on just all the issues here and the things, the genealogies and other places of the Bible it conflicts with and things going on. I just want to kind of throw some things out there for you, and then we'll just move on. So let's then look at verse 8. Now these are the names of the descendants of Israel who came into Egypt, Jacob and his sons. Let that just take confidence in that this is a title for you. This is the title of this genealogy. Other times these names are listed, they don't have the same title always. But here this list has this title. These are the names of the descendants of Israel who came into Egypt, Jacob and his sons. Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and the sons of Reuben, Hanoch, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. The sons of Simeon, Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. Interesting that it says that. The sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. The sons of Judah, Er, Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. But Er and Onan died in the land of Canaan. And the sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. The sons of Issachar, Tola, Puvah, Yab, and Shimron. The sons of Zebulun, Sered, Elon, and Jalil. These are the sons of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob in Paddan Aram, together with his daughter Dinah. Altogether, his sons and his daughters numbered 33. The sons of Gad, Ziphion, Haggi, Shuni, Esbon, Eri, Arodi, and Areli. The sons of Asher, Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, Beriah, with Sarah, their sister. And the sons of Beriah, Heber and Malchiel. These are the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban gave to Leah, his daughter, and these she bore to Jacob, 16 persons. The sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife, Joseph and Benjamin. And to Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On, bore to him. And the sons of Benjamin, Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Mupim, Hupim, and Ard. These are the sons of Rachel, who were born to Jacob, 14 persons in all. The sons of Dan, Hushim. The sons of Naphtali, Jazeel, Guni, Jezer, and Shalem. These are the sons of Bilhah, whom Laban gave to Rachel his daughter, and these she bore to Jacob, 7 persons in all. Okay, so there are these listings divided up or grouped by each wife or each concubine wife, each servant wife, right? Each of these wives, and they are mentioned in the order, I would say, of family honor, the way that family honor would be perceived then. And I mean this for the woman. What were they up in arms about? What was that arms race about between Rachel and Leah to begin with? Who would have the most sons? Who would get the most honor? And they are mentioned in that order. Leah, 33. Man, not only did she personally have more, her children have had, the next generation has gone on to produce way more. 33. Right? And then you think, well, then Rachel, probably next. Oh, no. She's beaten. Right? Zilpah, that was Leah's servant, even outclassed Rachel. 16. Then Rachel, 14. And then Rachel's concubine, or Rachel's servant, this concubine wife, right? Bilhah, 7. Big difference, right? 49 versus 21 for Leah and her concubine versus Rachel and hers. Or Leah, 33, Rachel, 14. Big difference. So they're mentioned in that order. Leah's honored more. There are some curious things here that happen. We're told again, Reuben is said to be Jacob's firstborn, it says specifically. Just as you think about the sons, technically he was the firstborn. I don't think he's counted as that as things move on. We see that, especially as he gives his blessings later on. But he was in fact his firstborn. Then we have this curious statement in verse 10, that Shaul is the son of a Canaanite woman. So we're not told anything about how many wives or what wives. We're just this guy's got at least 2 wives, right? He's got some of these sons, and then he's got this one son who was the son of a Canaanite woman. That's at least wife number 2. So there's that. Then we've got Judah. We know we know there's more wives than one for him. We've got, or at least more than one woman involved. He's got Er and Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah, but Er and Onan died in the land of Canaan. So his descendants are found mainly through Perez, right? Well, who's, so it's, you've got Tamar involved in all of that. Now then, it says in verse 15, these are the sons of Leah whom she bore to Jacob in Paddan Aram, together with his daughter Dinah. Altogether his sons and his daughters numbered 33. It says specifically in this instance, these are the sons of Leah whom she bore to Jacob in Paddan Aram. Paddan Aram was back before they came back to the Promised Land. So Moses is saying all of those sons of Leah were born in Paddan Aram. Now, not all the next generation, but those sons. Leah bore to Jacob these sons, and these are all their descendants, but those sons were born to him out in Paddan Aram. It says, together with his daughter Dinah. Altogether, his sons and his daughters numbered 33. And this is curious because as you go through and you count these names, you get 33 boys. And Dinah's number 34. She's the only daughter mentioned by name. But then you have Er and Onan died in the land of Canaan. So maybe we're not counting them. So that gets us down to 32. So who are we missing? Well, it says altogether with his sons and daughters, plural, numbered 33. So he had one other daughter. She doesn't even get a name. She's the only one of all Leah's descendants born to Jacob that doesn't have a name. Maybe. Or maybe there's some other reason we're getting 33. But you count 33 and then Dinah. So you would expect it to say, Numbers 33. That it would say something like, these are the sons of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob and Paddan Aram. Altogether, his sons numbered 33. But it mentions also there was Dinah, and then it says altogether his sons and his daughters numbered 33. It's strange. All of this is couched in a larger list that is titled, these are the names of the descendants of Israel who came to Egypt, Jacob and his sons. It's strange we're talking about daughters at all. And then we're talking about daughters in terms of the number we're getting. It's very bizarre. Verse 16, now the next list. These are this says the sons of Gad, and it mentions them, and then it says, look at the end of verse 17. Beriah with Sarah their sister. Mentions another woman. Don't know why. It's strange. So these are the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban gave to Leah, his daughter, and these she bore to Jacob, 16 persons. Right? And the woman is counted there. The girl is counted there in the 16 persons. I thought there was a list of his sons. I'm counting a daughter here. Next section. The sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife. Right? Joseph and Benjamin. No, let's say this also. Rachel is the only one of these four sections divided by the women. She's the only one who it leads out with the sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife. Notice in verse 16 it doesn't say these are the sons of Zilpah. It just starts out with the sons. Same way with Leah, it doesn't start out with these are the sons of Leah. It finishes with that. Rachel's the only one who it leads out with about Rachel. I think, of course, there's reasons for that because of their relationship. Joseph and Benjamin. And to Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim. Right? Now wait a second. Think about that. Now it says, to Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, which we know. But go back to verse 8. These are the names of the descendants of Israel who came into Egypt, Jacob and his sons. It sounds like you're listing all the people who came there with him. But these guys they've never met him. Right? Ephraim and Manasseh don't even know him. They wouldn't know what he looked like. They don't know anything about him. They never met him. Well, why are we counting those guys? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. Whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On, bore to him. And the sons of Benjamin. And it mentions these men. These are the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob, 14 persons in all. Then you have the bit about these sons of Bilhah, 7 persons in all. Now, if you add up those numbers, 33 and 7, what do we get? 33 and 7. Somebody. Some math expert. 40. How about 16 and 14? 30. So 30 and 40 is 70. Verse 26. All the persons belonging to Jacob who came into Egypt, who were his own descendants, not including Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. Now is Moses bad at math? Or are we? Or, let's read the next verse. And the sons of Joseph, who were born to him in Egypt, were 2. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. Okay, well, there's the number 70. Okay, we got 70. Here's the strange one, though. All the persons belonging to Jacob who came into Egypt, who were his own descendants, not including Jacob's sons' wives, were 66. And then he says, now, but there were these other 2 guys who were already born in Egypt. And so it gets to 70. I don't talk that way. You don't talk that way. If I said there were 66 people, if I gave you a list of 70 names, and I said, and that's 66, and you'd go, wait a minute. And then I would qualify by telling you the 4 names I excluded in that 66 number, and then now we're at 70. And you say, oh, okay, now I see what you did there. All right. I see. Okay, I got it. But Moses, he gives us 70 names, and he says, now there were 66 people, but remember Joseph had these 2 sons, and so it's 70. That's very strange. But he doesn't just give us these numbers. He says things. All the persons, listen carefully. All the persons belonging to Jacob who came, not Jacob, belonging to Jacob, who came into Egypt, who were his own descendants, not including Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. Okay, it's like fine. And the sons of Joseph, who were born to him in Egypt, were 2. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. So I've got to get from 70 names down to 66. I'd like to take out Er and Onan because they didn't come. Now I'm at 68, right? And I need 2 more. And he mentioned 2 more. These sons of Joseph. Okay, that gets me down to 66. There's my 66. That's the way I want to get there. Other people get there different ways. Then how do I get up to 70? Right? If I'm excluded Er and Onan, and this says these are the person who came into Egypt. I can't include Er and Onan. So the highest, he mentioned 68 names. Or he summarized these groups, and he got to 68. And that included these 2 boys. So what do I do? How do I get another 2 names? Well, Dinah wasn't counted in the number 33. Dinah gets me to 34, but I can't count her sister, which is strange. Or maybe I do count her sister, and that gets me to 70. Or maybe I don't count her sister, but now I count Jacob, and that gets me to 70. Or maybe I compare this to other chronologies in Numbers and in 1 Chronicles, and I get totally different numbers in names. And then I got to come up with 70. And some of them come up with 70. Or maybe I look at the Septuagint at a version from another place and I see something. Or I look at Jubilees and I see a different 70 and I see different names and the spellings are different. And I don't know what you do. I don't have an easy answer for you. But I know that no one who read this from Moses' pen thought, Moses, we've got to make some changes here. You've really screwed this up. They all accepted this and believed it. It's faithful here to his intent. And so, unfortunately, he doesn't tell us exactly where he's adding and subtracting names in order, specifically to get to that number, why he says 70. He gives us a listing of 70 names that includes more than 70 names, but they're not all counted, but we're going to count it as 70 and breaks them up the way he does. And then he adds them up and totals them up to 66. And then he says 70. It's implied that we have some knowledge about these families and things, which we have some of it because of the stories we've read, and we can get there in some ways, but are not super confident we're getting there to 70 the right way. And he gives me 70 names, and he says 66. I think I can get to 66. Then he says 70 again. I'm not sure how he gets back to that. I got some ideas. And scholars argue about this ad nauseum, literally, right? Ad nauseum. And so, that's all I'm going to say about it, 70 names. Now, the only other thing we might say is that 7 is this nice round number. And 70 is a nice round number. And it may well be that everybody knows some of these guys weren't born until later or whatever kind of thing. Or this person, that person. But the point is to make a declaration about their arrival in Egypt with the number 70. That could very well be. We already know he's selectively including some daughters and not others and this sort of thing. He's very selectively choosing these names. So he's getting these numbers, 33, 16, 14, 7. There's other repetitions of the number 7. 14 for Rachel, 7 for her concubine, and no multiples of 7 for the others. That's interesting. Then it all comes into 70. I'm not trying to say that Moses is, just doing all these weird things or whatever, but I'm just saying these things did kind of matter to them some. The fact that they do appear at least opens the door to the possibility that just like when, you've got in the New Testament 14 generations, 14 generations, 14 generations. So we look back at the genealogy and say, that's not 14 generations. They just selectively just edited it to get to 14. And we look at that and cry foul, and they all read it and said, that's good what you did there. That's a good point. That's a really good argument you made. And we just look at it as an inaccuracy, but actually it's an argument. And it could be that Moses is making an argument that, look, they got there. How did they arrive? 70. God had provided for them perfectly, wholly. It was wonderful. Nothing missing, no one lacking. They had everything they needed. God provided. They got there. There's still a plan to be put in place, but notice they came 70 strong. Right? But we already know he's being so selective. Think of this. Verse 26, all the persons belonging to Jacob who came into Egypt, who were his own descendants. So we're not counting about anyone who just was a friend who came, any servant, nothing like that. Only his own descendants, but not counting his sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. So we're already excluding a lot of the family to get to this 70 number. If we're saying the family had grown to this number, it would be way more than 70 at this point. Way more. How big was this clan? Well, count his servants and the people that have said, I want to be with you. I'm hitching myself to your wagon. I mean, none of those people, or hitching my wagon to you, none of those people are counted. A certain very select few. So just don't get all bothered if you go to these other genealogies which have different titles and different purposes, and they vary slightly. It's all right. Okay, now, we pick back up with the rest of the narrative now. All that's been done. Verse 28. This section, again, the narrative picks back up. Joseph presents himself and his preparations to his father Israel. Verse 28. He had sent Judah ahead of him. This is Israel, had sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to show the way before him in Goshen. And they came into the land of Goshen. And then Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father in Goshen. He presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive. And Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household, who were in the land of Canaan, have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for they have been keepers of livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. And when Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? You shall say, your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers. Why would you say that? In order that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. So this is the plan. Okay, so this is it's a remarkable scene. It's remarkably brief where we wish it was long, and it's remarkably long where we wish it was brief. Like, I don't think most of us really particularly care how Joseph had planned the conversations so that they would get to go to Goshen, and they would, we would be happy probably if it just said, and they came, and because we already heard from Pharaoh that he was going to give them the land. So just saying they settled in the land of Goshen as Pharaoh had said, and they enjoyed, the fatness of the land, just as was told, and they lived happily ever after for a while, right? Something like that would have been fine. What I want to know about, tell me about Joseph and Jacob and their reunion. Right? Moses spent a lot of time, not a lot of time, but a lot more time talking about the reunion between Joseph and the brothers. But it's so brief. It's interesting. But there are, I think if we'll read for the clues that we see, we pay attention to what Moses does say, he paints for us a wonderful and a beautiful picture. So let's pick up here. Before we even talk about reunion of father and son, let's consider Judah. He had sent already Judah ahead of him to Joseph to show the way before him to Goshen. So they all leave Canaan together, and either from the outset, maybe from the point of the altar on, or maybe at some point along the way, he tells Judah, you need to go on ahead to your brother and make sure everything's ready so we know exactly where we're supposed to go, what houses are we supposed to go in, what city, around what well, whatever, where are we supposed to be at in Goshen? So Judah comes down there to prepare the way. It's amazing. Judah, who his idea was to sell Joseph to slavery, now he's go down there and talk to your brother and visit with him and get everything ready for us so it's all lined up when we come. We've talked already about the change that we've seen in Judah, in weeks past, and how remarkable it is. And it is amazing. And you see his continued trustworthiness and the way his father continues to look to him among his sons. Go send Judah. This is the job you'd give. You'd give the one you trust. You'd give the one you lean on. And it's Judah. And so Judah goes. And that's a wonderful picture. It's similar to like what you have with John Mark in the New Testament with Paul. He's useful to me. Here was a man who had sold his beloved son. Judah had sold the son that Jacob loved. He had left the family. He didn't want no part in these things. Well, he's repented. He's come back. He's a changed man even since then. He's totally different now. He acts in love. He's self-sacrificing. He's reliable. Just another picture of Judah and the way he stands out among the brothers again. Sent ahead of him to Joseph to show the way before him in Goshen. And they came, so that happens. We're not told anything about Judah and Joseph's conversations, anything about it, just that it worked, it was pragmatic, right? Whatever the conversations were, Judah now knows where to go. So they don't come to Judah at Joseph's place. Judah evidently comes back. He probably goes, checks things out in Goshen, makes sure the preparations are ready, that this is right. Then he comes up on his way up and he meets them, and then they all go to Goshen and he shows them where they need to go. They get settled. Word probably gets sent to Joseph, probably not told to us, that they have in fact arrived. They are settling now. Verse 29, then Joseph, what does he do? Prepares his chariot, which I think, based on what it says later, he presented himself to his father, I think means something like, just like when he sent all these things up to his father, look at all the riches and the wealth and my honor. I think he intends that if he's a military man, he puts on his dress blues, and he is ready. He's in high honor. He's in the finest of the garments. He's wearing he's wearing that honorary signet. He's got the robe that Pharaoh gave him. He's wearing it. It's a better robe than you gave me, Dad. It's amazing. He's got his entourage with him. He's right. He prepares his chariot. The only chariot better in all of Egypt is Pharaoh's own chariot. It's Pharaoh's second chariot. He's got it. It's got diamonds and rubies and all this stuff. It's gold plated. This is something, right? Get the best of the horses, groom them, present them, make ready. Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father in Goshen, which was nearby. We know that. That's why one of the reasons he wanted to be in Goshen, because that was nearby. You told him that earlier in the earlier chapters. He presented himself to him. What would that presentation have looked like? It just breezes right over it, but it's a presentation. I don't know, it was probably impressive. Was he the first one to come, or did all of his people come in first? And then he came in last? To sounds of trumpets and harps and things? I don't know. Sounds a little bit pretentious, but it was a presentation of this royal figure. And he presents himself to his father. And then what does he do then? fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. And that's all it says. We don't read about anything else. Wept, fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Then Israel said to Joseph, now let me die. I can die in peace now. Right? If I die tonight, I die a happy man. Right? People say that kind of thing, you know. That's what he says. Let me die, since I have seen your face and I know that you are still alive. We don't read about any response from Joseph. We just read about this response from Israel. The reunion of a father and son. It's amazing. I think, I was talking to Angela about this the other day and just saying, like, in so many ways, it doesn't seem important that Jacob go to Egypt and see his son. Like, what is there? I mean, God made the promise that you and your descendants with you would get to share in my promises, that there would be a cohesiveness about the family and a enjoying the promises of God together. That's important. So for that sake, it has to happen. But I just mean, like in terms of bringing Israel, you know, or the nation of Israel down here to Egypt and making them great, like if he died on the way, I don't think anything too much really changes. Now, God had made some promises that he didn't have to make, that he had to fulfill. But I think I just want to say that because to me, it underscores that God isn't just interested in kind of bringing this thing about, but he's particularly kind to people along the way. Like it's such a kindness to him. Jacob gets to the place, he has a day in his life where he says, oh, I could die today a happy man. This is all I've wanted. That's huge. Now, I don't say that to ignore the last 22 years of sorrow. That's not unimportant. Those things in many ways were necessary for the family to go through the things that they've gone through. But I'm just pointing out that Jacob is now to the place where he says, I could die right now and this would be all right. There's nothing more I want. I've got it all. It's quite a thing. I've got the promises of God that he's going to continue on. He's with me in this, and now I've seen my son. So there's that. It's a beautiful picture. It's very brief. I think we all would like to see that scene linger a little more and just hear a little bit more about what happened there, but that's not Moses' purpose. The end of the story isn't the reunion of father and son. We're just still in the middle of things. We're still preparing a nation. We're still preparing a people. God's still working. And there's much still in doubt. There are some official matters that need to happen. Now, you remember Pharaoh already gave permission. He not only gave permission, he commanded Joseph to say these things, tell them, send all these things up to them and tell them to come into the land and this is where they're going to settle. So, that sounds pretty official. But if they were to come and then settle and then no word was given to Pharaoh, they kind of did it off to the side. Let's see, Pharaoh gets word about something happening over there that he does not too wild about. You could always come back and say, now wait, did you try to sneak this in, Joseph? You weren't upfront about these things? What's going on? So none of that happens. It's very official. It's very upfront, so everybody can see it. Let's go to Pharaoh. And so this is the plan. He says, Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. So that they've arrived. You sent for them, they've come. Now understand, Pharaoh, these men are shepherds. And they've been keepers of livestock. And they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. So they haven't just come. I know you mentioned that they wouldn't need to bring all their stuff, and that's fine, but they did bring it. And they're shepherds, and so they've got all their livestock. So, you talked about sending, maybe they could be in Goshen. The idea is, like, obviously that's where they need to be, is in Goshen. because of all their livestock. And they've got a lot of it. We all know that. They've got massive flocks and herds. So this is what I'm going to say. And then he says, now, what's going to happen then? I know how this stuff works because I've been in this place for 22 years and I've been serving Pharaoh now for some time. This is year 9. We've been 9 years into my service of him. And this is how it works. When I go and talk to him about somebody who's come in this situation, then Pharaoh, he calls you in. And so when that happens, when Pharaoh calls you, and what he'll say is, look, I know this guy. And I know what he's going to want to do because he's brought you down here to take care of you. He's going to want to set you up to prosper in whatever occupation you have. And I've already told him that you guys I will have told him that you guys are shepherds. And when he asks you, you need to say the same thing. But you need to not just say it, you need to say it a certain way. I want you to say, when he says, what is your occupation? You shall say, and this is exactly what you need to say, your servants have been keepers of the livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers. Why say that? Because maybe, imagine Pharaoh's down there and he says, okay, so you guys have been shepherds. That's too low a thing for you. I've got a good spot for you. Here, come back to this town over here, and I've got a position. I need somebody to collect my taxes for me, and you can do that. You guys are probably good with numbers. It's not that bad. I'll give somebody can help you, and let's do that. Let's honor you in that way. Nope, no cushy government job for these guys. They don't want that. They want to be left alone. They don't want to integrate into Egypt. They don't want to be a part of Egyptian society. They want to just eat and be left alone. And the way they secure that is by getting out in Goshen. So what they're able to tell Pharaoh is, listen, hey, you might have some other ideas about jobs for us, but I'm telling you, since we could crawl, all we've ever known until now is keeping care of sheep and flocks and livestock and goats and bulls and calves, and that's it. I don't have any other skill. We're really good at that, and we're terrible at everything else. And not just us. For generations, our fathers and our fathers' fathers, that's all we've ever done. Well, what is suitable for those sort of people? Well, let them keep doing what they're doing. Just give them the best place to do it. And that's what he does. But he says, say that in order that you may dwell in the land of Goshen. For every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. This way we won't have to do and rub shoulders with them too much. We can be our own people. We can enjoy the fatness of the land. We can be in the best place. We can continue on like we are. Our lifestyle can remain generally unchanged. We can be our own people in Egypt. Because of my position with Pharaoh, because of the way God sent me down here to preserve us, we're in a situation now where if we'll just play our cards right, we're going to be able to be off here by ourselves, prospering in the land, free from everything that Pharaoh's concerned with his own people, and just make a go of it. And that's the plan. And of course, next chapter we see that's exactly what happens. That'll all come out next time, and how those things work out. It's really remarkable. It's wonderful to see. It's rather ironic and comical as well. So that's where we are. So this is the story. This is what chapter 46 brings us down to this point. One other thing just to note, and just in terms of maybe we could draw some parallels here again, or a parallel at least between Joseph and Christ, is Joseph sins out for his father and his family and everybody. Tell them about my honors. Tell them all the good things that have come to me. I came here and I passed, in a sense, through death itself, out of the pit. Here I am. I'm exalted to the right hand of this ruler. I run everything. All these honors are upon me. Come to me. I can provide for you. And when you get there, he says, now it's all planned out. It's going to be just perfect. Follow me, and you'll receive blessing beyond measure. There are certainly parallels there with the Lord Jesus Christ. Right? He says, I go prepare a place for you. There's so many things, that language means and indicates. And I think this is just part of it, is the way that it's all lined out for us. Every need that we have has been planned for. Every possible harm that could come to us has been thought out and avoided. Or if we have to go through it, it's been accompanied with great blessings. Well, that's all I have for this chapter. Maybe there's questions or comments. As I mentioned, I really